actually here. It's brilliant. So thank you. I'm going to move on because we've got quite a full agenda today. And thank you so much. If I could just ask everybody to give you a great big round of applause. You did brilliantly. Mike, you have got a speech tonight for us. And has Keith gone? Sorry. So Mike, your speech is going to be an F3, speaking with conviction. And I haven't got my agenda right in front of me, but oh yeah, now I do. So you are, it can't happen here. So can I invite you to take over and give us your lovely speech?
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good. Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to heckle.
Fair, fine. Thank you. This will be controversial, and you may agree with me or disagree. Whichever is the case, I hope that you will respect my opinion and I will respect yours. And if we don't agree, there may come a time when we can discuss further and reach agreement or agree to differ. But may I say up front that what I'm about to say, I do truly believe, and that is that there has been embedded corruption at the very highest level of government in the UK. Why do I say that? Because time and time again, the government has given very lucrative contracts to organisations with no experience of performing the function that they're being paid to do, without a fair tendering process, and according to the National Audit Office, paying far in excess of a reasonable sum for the service in question. They are also appointing individuals with close connections to government with no prior experience of the role in question to head organisations. Why does this matter? It matters for reasons of fairness, public interest and equality. I'm using a very strong term, corruption. So what is corruption? Corruption is the abuse of public office for personal gain. We don't like to think that corruption can happen in the national government of a mature society. We think it only happens in the third world countries or in local government. We use terms like lack of checks and balances and nepotism. The media are more interested in the antics of the royal family than the erosion of democracy. Now, we know the £1.5 billion has been handed to friends of leading Conservatives, members of the Eton network and the public school network, people who are white and upper class. 500 billion has been handed to companies based in tax havens. So what have we seen? Let's look at a few of the many examples. We've seen 840,000 paid to Public First, run by two long-term associates of Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings, largely for communications concerning Brexit. There was no competitive bidding process or formal contract until a much later date, when it was documented as concerning COVID. We've seen £900,000 awarded to Hanbury Strategy to conduct public opinion polling on the coronavirus pandemic. Again, no competitive tender process, despite Hanbury being unsuited to do the work and simply contracting it to others. Surprise, surprise, Hanbury was also run by a former Conservative advisor and a former government advisor to David Cameron. The government ignored the law which requires them to publish details of the contract. But we know that the contract came to an end after 4 months, with Hanbury running up a bill of £500,000. But those sums are dwarfed by 250 million paid for PPE to a jeweller based in Florida called Michael Sager, who had no previous experience of providing PPE. In his own words, he boasts of having lucrative contacts with the government of the United Kingdom. And he paid 50 million to a middleman to act as his go-between. So his profit has been calculated as 28 million. I could have done it for half of that, but I don't blame him. I blame the government, but the arrangement didn't last long. Sadly, the middleman stopped performing and the PPE was significantly delayed. But finally, the PPE was delivered, except it couldn't be used because the masks were unsuitable and the gowns were single wrapped instead of double wrapped. And unfortunately, gowns for sterile environments have to be double wrapped. We've seen Kate being a vaccine task force, but she's a venture capitalist with no public health experience, but she's married to a Conservative minister. We've seen Dido Harding placed as head of track and trace, but she has no public health experience, but she's married to a Conservative MP. Mike Coop has been placed as head of testing, but he's got no public health experience. The list goes on and on. There's no advertising for these roles. There's no proper recruitment process. Why, when facing the single biggest threat to public health this country has ever seen, would the government of the day not want the best qualified people to lead the response? The government is also embedding class privilege by appointing people who are willing to work without salaries, so they gain other benefits from giving lucrative contracts to their associates. 1.2 billion has been spent on track and trace. This is more than the entire general practice budget, and the test and trace system has failed to reach the 80% of people that was needed to reduce infection rates. Closed recruitment particularly discriminates against Black, Asian and minority ethnic people and disabled people. The government's practice of offering these roles unpaid out to those with family wealth. Those who don't rub shoulders with high-ranking ministers are also shut out. Public confidence is undermined. And how can we see without transparency whose interests these serves, the public or the private interests of friends of the Conservative Party? These examples will be taken to court, but the government does not contend that they were lawful, simply that the organisation who is taking them to court don't have the standing to do so. And the only other companies who could have done the job have the right to make a legal challenge. But these companies won't do so for fear of losing out on future contracts. But an individual who's lived in the UK and in Nigeria said that the problem is worse in the UK because Nigeria is aware that they have a problem. So what do I want? I want our institutions to be cleansed. I want, most of all, the scales of complacency to be shifted from the eyes of the public. Germany has been forced to confront its history of racism. We've never been shocked into reconsidering our moral view of ourselves as a nation. Sadly, we can't rely on shame and honour anymore to get rid of disgraced people like Dominic Cummings after his trip to Barnard Castle, or Priti Patel for a blatant bullying. We can't rely on the Prime Minister to appoint people with standards of morality and decency that their office requires, or to dismiss those that transgress. Instead, our government removes the heads of the civil service who attempt to hold it to account. They avoid parliamentary scrutiny, and they can blatantly disregard the law. So it's up to you what you make of these examples. My view is that there are so many and so blatant that they can't be explained as errors or due to pressure of an unprecedented pandemic. In a crisis or a war, we need a government that can keep a cool head, make sure that they put in place the best people for the job, and that they're seen to uphold the law. And when this is not the case, we need the media to hold them to account, and they need to be made to answer to the public. Thank you.
Thank you you very much. That was such a well researched and, like you said, a brave speech.
I've gone very close.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree that was, yeah, it is a speech that not everybody would take on, even if they think corruption is rife. And it was lovely, personally for me,